The summer heat in London was unbearable that Tuesday afternoon. Buckingham Palace stood majestically against the clear blue sky, its golden gates gleaming under the scorching sun. Thousands of tourists from around the world had gathered, cameras ready, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood Marcus Thompson, a 28-year-old construction worker from Detroit, Michigan. This was his first trip to Europe, a birthday gift from his girlfriend Sarah, who had saved for months to make this dream vacation possible. Marcus had always been the type of person who lived life on the edge. Back home, his friends knew him as the guy who would take any dare, no matter how ridiculous it seemed. Marcus wore a bright red baseball cap, cargo shorts, and sneakers that had seen better days. His phone was constantly in his hand, recording everything he saw. He had promised Sarah, who couldn't make the trip due to work commitments, that he would document every single moment of their London adventure. What he didn't know was that this promise would lead him into a situation that would change his life forever. The Queen's Guards stood perfectly still in their iconic red uniforms and tall black bearskin hats. Their faces showed no emotion, their eyes stared straight ahead, and their hands gripped their rifles with military precision. These weren't just tourist attractions dressed up for show. These were real soldiers, highly trained members of the British Army's Household Division, responsible for protecting the royal family and their residences. Marcus had read about the Queen's Guards online before his trip. He knew they were supposed to remain motionless and silent, no matter what happened around them. He had seen videos on social media of tourists trying to make the guards laugh, dance, or react in some way. Most of these attempts failed miserably, with the guards maintaining their professional composure despite the distractions. But Marcus had a different idea brewing in his mind. He wanted to create content that would go viral, something that would make him internet famous when he returned to Detroit. He had been posting videos throughout his London trip, but none had received the attention he craved. Standing there in the sweltering heat, watching the stoic guards, an incredibly foolish plan began to form in his head. Sarah had warned him before he left not to do anything stupid. She knew Marcus well enough to understand his tendency to seek attention and take unnecessary risks. During their video calls each evening, she had repeatedly reminded him to behave himself and not embarrass them both. Marcus had laughed off her concerns, promising to be on his best behavior. The crowd around Marcus grew larger as more tourists arrived for the ceremony. Families with children, elderly couples on vacation, groups of college students backpacking through Europe, all stood patiently behind the barriers, respecting the space and the traditions they were witnessing. Street performers entertained the waiting crowds, vendors sold Union Jack souvenirs, and tour guides shared historical facts about the palace and its guards. Marcus noticed a particular guard stationed near the palace entrance. The guard appeared young, probably in his early 20s, with a stern expression visible beneath the shadow of his bearskin hat. His name tag read Private James Wellington, though Marcus couldn't see it from his position in the crowd. Private Wellington had been serving with the Grenadier Guards for 2 years and had performed ceremonial duties at various royal residences during that time. What Marcus didn't understand was the serious nature of these soldiers' duties. The Queen's Guards weren't performers or actors playing a role for tourists. They were active military personnel carrying out official duties to protect the monarchy. Their training was rigorous, their discipline unwavering, and their authority real. Interfering with their duties wasn't just disrespectful, it was illegal. As Marcus stood there, his phone battery at 78%, he started filming the guards. He zoomed in on their faces, trying to capture any sign of human emotion or weakness. He made funny faces at them, waved his arms, and even tried doing a little dance, hoping for some reaction. The guards remained perfectly still, their professionalism intact despite the ridiculous display happening just meters away. Other tourists began to notice Marcus's behavior. Some chuckled at his antics, while others looked embarrassed for him. A few parents used the moment as a teaching opportunity, explaining to their children why it was important to respect the guards and the traditions they represented. An elderly British gentleman shook his head disapprovingly and muttered something about disrespectful Americans under his breath. Marcus's phone buzzed with notifications. His previous videos from the trip were getting some likes and comments, but nothing spectacular. His follower count remained stubbornly low, and his dreams of social media stardom seemed as distant as ever. This frustrated him more than he cared to admit. He had always been competitive, always wanting to be the center of attention, and his failure to gain online recognition was eating at him. The temperature continued to rise, and Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He glanced at his watch. Still 40 minutes until the changing of the guard ceremony would begin. The crowd was getting restless, and security personnel were keeping a watchful eye on everyone, ensuring that barriers remained in place and that tourists maintained appropriate distances from the guards. Unknown to Marcus, several plainclothes security officers had already taken notice of his behavior. Their job was to identify potential threats or troublemakers before situations escalated. Marcus's increasingly bold attempts to get reactions from the guards had put him on their radar. They began positioning themselves strategically around the area, ready to intervene if necessary. Marcus pulled out his phone again and opened his social media app. He typed a quick message. About to do something crazy at Buckingham Palace. This is going to break the internet. He hesitated for a moment before hitting the post button. Deep down, a small voice in his head warned him that he was about to cross a line he shouldn't cross. But his desire for attention and his impulsive nature won the battle against his better judgment. He put his phone away and took a deep breath. The plan forming in his mind was simple but incredibly stupid. He was going to get closer to one of the guards, much closer than the barriers allowed. He was going to try to touch the guard, maybe even pretend to attack him, all while filming the reaction. In his mind, this would create the viral content he desperately wanted. What Marcus failed to realize was that his next actions would trigger a chain of events that would leave everyone speechless, including himself. Marcus took another look around the crowded courtyard, his heart racing with anticipation and nervousness. The plan he had conceived seemed brilliant in his adrenaline-fueled mind, but he needed the perfect moment to execute it. He watched as families took selfies, children pointed excitedly at the guards, and tour groups listened intently to their guides' explanations about British royal traditions. Private James Wellington stood at his post, completely unaware that he was about to become the unwilling star of what Marcus hoped would be his breakthrough social media moment. Wellington had been on duty since early morning, having started his shift at 6 a.m. The weight of his ceremonial uniform, combined with the summer heat, made his job physically demanding, but his training had prepared him for much worse conditions. The young soldier's mind was focused on his duties and responsibilities. He thought about his girlfriend Emma, who was studying nursing in Manchester, and their plans to meet for dinner when his shift ended. He thought about his mother back in Yorkshire, who worried about him constantly but was incredibly proud of his service. He had no idea that in the next few minutes, his life would take an unexpected turn that would make him a reluctant internet sensation. Marcus positioned himself strategically near the barrier closest to Private Wellington. He had noticed that this particular section of the courtyard had fewer security cameras pointing directly at it, and the crowd was slightly thinner here. He pulled out his phone, opened his camera app, and switched to video mode. His hands were trembling slightly. Whether from excitement or nerves, he couldn't tell. A group of Japanese tourists stood nearby, peacefully taking photos and speaking in hushed, respectful tones. An elderly American couple was reading from a guidebook about the history of the household division. A mother was explaining to her young son why the guards couldn't move or speak while on duty. None of them had any idea what was about to unfold before their eyes. Marcus pressed the record button and held his phone steady. He spoke in a loud whisper, trying to sound confident for his future viewers. "All right, everyone. Marcus here, live from Buckingham Palace in London. You've seen people try to make these guards laugh or move, but nobody has ever tried what I'm about to do. This is going to be absolutely insane." He took a deep breath and looked directly at Private Wellington, who continued to stare straight ahead with unwavering discipline. Marcus knew he had to act quickly before security noticed his intentions. The barrier separating tourists from the guards was only about 3 feet high, not particularly difficult to cross for someone of his athletic build. What Marcus didn't realize was that crossing that barrier would immediately classify him as a security threat. The protocols for dealing with such situations were clear and would be implemented without hesitation. The guards were authorized to use necessary force to protect themselves, the palace, and the royal family. This wasn't a game or a tourist attraction. This was a serious military operation. Marcus glanced around one more time, making sure his phone was capturing everything at the right angle. He could see the red uniforms of the guards, the golden details of the palace architecture, and the blue sky above. Everything looked perfect for his viral video. He imagined the comments rolling in, the shares multiplying, and his follower count skyrocketing. Without any further hesitation, Marcus suddenly vaulted over the barrier. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Tourists gasped and stepped back in shock. Several people started filming with their own phones, sensing that something significant was happening. Children cried out in surprise, and parents quickly pulled them away from the unfolding situation. Private Wellington's training kicked in instantly. His eyes snapped toward the approaching threat. His grip tightened on his rifle and his entire body tensed for action. Years of military conditioning had prepared him for exactly this type of scenario, though he never expected it to involve an American tourist with a phone. Marcus approached the guard with his phone held high, a manic grin on his face. He was so focused on getting the perfect shot that he failed to notice the subtle but significant changes in the guard's posture. Wellington was no longer the motionless statue that tourists expected to see. He was now a soldier prepared to defend his post. "Hey there, buddy," Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet courtyard. "Smile for the camera. This is going to make us both famous." The plainclothes security officers who had been monitoring Marcus immediately sprang into action. Their radios crackled with urgent communications as they coordinated their response. Additional security personnel began moving toward the scene from various points around the palace grounds. Marcus reached out his free hand toward Private Wellington, intending to pat him on the shoulder, or maybe even pretend to throw a punch for dramatic effect. In his mind, this would be the money shot, the moment that would make his video go viral and transform him into an internet celebrity. But Private Wellington had different plans. The young guard's reaction was swift, professional, and completely unexpected to Marcus. With movements honed by countless hours of training, Wellington stepped forward and firmly but non-violently intercepted Marcus's approaching hand. His voice, when he spoke, was clear, authoritative, and carried the weight of military command. "Stand back. Do not touch the guard." The shout echoed across the courtyard like a thunderclap. Every conversation stopped. Every phone camera turned toward the confrontation, and hundreds of tourists found themselves witnessing something they would never forget. Marcus froze mid-stride, his phone still recording, his mouth hanging open in complete shock. This wasn't what he had expected at all. In his mind, the guard was supposed to remain motionless and silent, allowing Marcus to create his content without interference. The reality of facing a trained soldier who was prepared to defend his post hit Marcus like a cold splash of water. Private Wellington maintained his position between Marcus and the palace, his stance professional but unmistakably defensive. His training had taught him to de-escalate situations whenever possible while maintaining security protocols. He wasn't looking to hurt the confused tourist, but he was absolutely prepared to prevent any further breach of security. Security officers reached the scene within seconds, surrounding Marcus from multiple directions. Their movements were coordinated and efficient, leaving no escape routes while maintaining the safety of nearby tourists. The lead officer, Sergeant Patricia Hayes, had 20 years of experience in royal protection and had dealt with countless similar situations over her career. Marcus looked around wildly, his phone still recording everything. The reality of his situation was beginning to sink in. This wasn't a game anymore. These weren't actors playing roles for tourist entertainment. He was surrounded by real security professionals who took their jobs very seriously, and he had just committed what could be considered a criminal offense. The crowd of tourists watched in stunned silence, many still filming the unprecedented scene unfolding before them. Parents covered their children's eyes, elderly visitors shook their heads in disapproval, and younger tourists whispered excitedly about posting their footage on social media. What happened next would become the most talked about incident at Buckingham Palace in years, and Marcus was about to learn that some viral fame comes with consequences he never could have imagined. Sergeant Patricia Hayes approached Marcus with the calm authority that came from decades of handling security situations at royal residences. Her voice was firm but not aggressive, designed to de-escalate the tension while maintaining complete control of the situation. She had seen every type of tourist behavior imaginable, from harmless photo requests to more serious security breaches. But something about this particular incident felt different. "Sir, please step away from the guard and place your hands where I can see them," Sergeant Hayes commanded, her hand resting on her radio, ready to call for additional backup if needed. Marcus complied immediately, his earlier bravado completely evaporated, replaced by genuine fear about what he had gotten himself into. Private Wellington returned to his ceremonial position, though his eyes remained alert and focused on the developing situation. The young soldier's heart was racing, but his external composure remained perfect. This was his first major incident since being assigned to Buckingham Palace duty, and he was determined to handle it with the professionalism expected of the Queen's Guard. Marcus held his phone loosely in his hand, the video still recording everything that was happening. His earlier excitement had transformed into panic as he realized the serious nature of his actions. The tourist who had dreamed of viral fame was now facing the very real possibility of arrest, prosecution, and international embarrassment. I was just trying to make a video," Marcus stammered, his voice shaking with nervousness. "I didn't mean any harm. I'm sorry, I'm really sorry." His apology sounded weak even to his own ears, and he could see that the security personnel weren't particularly impressed by his explanation. The crowd of tourists watched with a mixture of fascination and horror. Many continued filming the scene, understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Social media posts were already beginning to appear, with hashtags like Buckingham Palace Incident and Guard Attack trending within minutes of the confrontation. What Marcus didn't know was that Private Wellington was struggling with his own internal conflict. The young soldier had been trained to respond to threats with appropriate force, but looking at the confused and frightened American tourist, he felt something unexpected: sympathy. Wellington could see that Marcus wasn't a real threat, just a foolish young man who had made an incredibly poor decision. During his 2 years of service, Private Wellington had encountered numerous tourists who had crossed lines, but most were quickly removed by security without any real drama. This situation was different because of Marcus's direct approach and his obvious intent to create some kind of spectacle. Yet something in the tourist's expression suggested genuine regret, rather than malicious intent. Sergeant Hayes began the standard procedure for handling security breaches. She radioed for a police response, initiated paperwork for a potential arrest, and started gathering witness statements from nearby tourists. The process was routine for her, but she noticed something unusual in Private Wellington's demeanor. "Wellington," she called quietly, "are you all right? Do you need to be relieved from duty?" The young guard turned slightly toward his superior, careful to maintain his ceremonial posture. "Sergeant," the individual appeared confused rather than threatening. "I believe he made an error in judgment rather than attempting any real assault." This was unusual. Most guards involved in security incidents were eager to see troublemakers prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Wellington's comment suggested something different, a level of understanding that went beyond typical military response protocols. Marcus overheard the conversation and felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this situation wasn't as dire as he had initially thought. He looked directly at Private Wellington, and for the first time since the incident began, the two young men made eye contact. "Please," Marcus said quietly. "I know I messed up really badly. I was just trying to make people laugh. I didn't understand how serious this was." Private Wellington studied Marcus's face carefully. The soldier saw genuine remorse, embarrassment, and fear. He also recognized something of himself in the tourist, a young man who had made mistakes and learned from them. Wellington thought about his own younger days before military service had taught him discipline and respect for authority. The crowd continued to grow as word spread about the incident. Tour guides were redirecting their groups away from the immediate area, but curious onlookers pressed closer, hoping to see how the situation would be resolved. The incident was becoming a spectacle in itself, exactly what Marcus had wanted, but nothing like what he had imagined. Sergeant Hayes completed her initial assessment and was preparing to transfer Marcus to the arriving police officers when Private Wellington did something completely unprecedented. He stepped slightly forward, breaking from his ceremonial position in a way that indicated he had something important to say. "Sergeant Hayes," Wellington said formally, "might I have a word with you privately?" This was highly irregular. Guards on ceremonial duty, were expected to remain silent and motionless except in cases of direct threat or emergency. For Wellington to request a private conversation during an active security incident was almost unheard of. Sergeant Hayes looked surprised, but nodded. She stepped a few feet away from Marcus, close enough to maintain security but far enough to allow for confidential communication. The other security officers maintained their positions around Marcus, ensuring he couldn't escape or cause further problems. "Sergeant," Wellington said quietly, "I've been thinking about this incident. The individual appears to be genuinely sorry and didn't actually make contact with me.
His actions were foolish but not malicious.
I wonder if there might be an alternative to formal charges." Sergeant Hayes raised an eyebrow. In her 20 years of experience, she had never heard a guard request leniency for someone who had breached security protocols. "Wellington, this man crossed a security barrier and approached you directly. That's a serious offense regardless of his intentions. I understand that, Sergeant. But I'm wondering if this might be an opportunity for education rather than punishment. Perhaps there's a way to handle this that serves everyone's interest better." Marcus couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see that something significant was happening. The guard who he had tried to approach was actually speaking on his behalf. The realization filled him with a mixture of gratitude and shame. Here was a soldier who had every right to press charges, yet he seemed to be advocating for mercy. The police officers arrived and began their standard procedures for handling security breaches at royal residences. They were prepared to arrest Marcus and process him through the criminal justice system. This was the normal protocol, and everyone expected the situation to proceed accordingly. But Private Wellington wasn't finished. He turned to Sergeant Hayes again and made a request that would surprise everyone present, including Marcus himself. "Sergeant, I would like to request permission to speak directly with the individual involved. I believe there might be a solution here that serves justice while also serving education." This was completely unorthodox. Guards didn't typically engage in conversation with security violators. Their job was to protect and maintain ceremonial duties, not to counsel confused tourists. But something in Wellington's tone suggested he had a specific plan in mind. Sergeant Hayes considered the request carefully. She had worked with Wellington for several months and knew him to be a thoughtful and responsible soldier. His record was spotless, his judgment was sound, and his request, while unusual, wasn't unreasonable. "Very well, Wellington. You have 2 minutes to speak with him, but we maintain security protocols throughout." What Private Wellington said next would change everything about this incident and create a moment that truly left everyone speechless. Private Wellington approached Marcus with measured steps, his military bearing evident even in this unusual situation. The crowd fell completely silent, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. Even the police officers paused their standard procedures, curious to see what the young guard had in mind. Marcus looked up at Wellington with a mixture of fear and hope. The soldier's face was serious but not hostile, and there was something in his eyes that suggested understanding rather than anger. Marcus had expected shouting, threats, or immediate arrest, but instead, he was faced with calm professionalism that was somehow more intimidating than aggression would have been. "What's your name?" Wellington asked quietly, his voice carrying just enough authority to command attention while remaining conversational. "Marcus Thompson," Marcus replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm from Detroit, Michigan." Wellington nodded thoughtfully. "Marcus, I'm Private James Wellington. I've been serving with the Queen's Guard for 2 years, and in that time I've seen many tourists make mistakes. But I've never seen someone who looked as genuinely sorry as you do right now." The unexpected kindness in Wellington's words hit Marcus harder than any punishment could have. He had been prepared for anger, legal consequences, and public humiliation, but he wasn't prepared for compassion from the very person he had wronged. "I am sorry," Marcus said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I really am. I was just trying to make a stupid video for social media. I didn't think about what it meant or how disrespectful it was. I'm an idiot." Wellington studied Marcus's face carefully. Years of military training had taught him to read people quickly and accurately. He could see genuine remorse, embarrassment, and a dawning understanding of the seriousness of his actions. This wasn't a hardened troublemaker or someone with malicious intent. This was a confused young man who had made a terrible decision. "Marcus," Wellington continued, "do you understand what we do here? Do you know what the Queen's Guard represents?" Marcus shook his head. realizing for the first time how little he actually knew about the people he had been treating as tourist attractions. "I thought you were just, I don't know, like actors or something. People who dress up for tourists. We're soldiers, Marcus. Real soldiers with real training and real responsibilities. We're here to protect the royal family and uphold centuries of tradition. When you crossed that barrier, you didn't just break a rule. You threatened something that millions of people consider sacred." The weight of Wellington's words settled over Marcus like a heavy blanket. He looked around at the crowd of tourists, many of whom were still filming the conversation. For the first time, he saw the disappointment and disapproval in their faces. He realized that his actions hadn't just affected him, they had disrespected an entire culture and tradition. "But here's what I want you to understand," Wellington continued, his voice growing stronger. "I don't think you're a bad person. I think you're someone who made a mistake because you didn't understand the situation, and I believe that people can learn from their mistakes." Sergeant Hayes watched the conversation with growing amazement. In her 2 decades of experience, she had never seen anything like this. Guards simply didn't engage in philosophical discussions with security violators. The standard protocol was arrest, prosecution, and ban from royal property. Yet Wellington was taking a completely different approach. The police officers were equally surprised. They had arrived expecting to process a straightforward case of security breach and public disorder. Instead, they found themselves witnessing what appeared to be a moment of genuine human connection between 2 young men from completely different worlds. Marcus wiped his eyes, not realizing that tears had started flowing. "What you're saying means everything to me right now. I expected you to hate me, to want me arrested and thrown out of the country. I can't believe you're being so kind when I was so stupid." "That's exactly why I'm doing this," Wellington replied. "Because kindness and understanding often teach better lessons than punishment alone." "But Marcus, I need you to understand something very important." Wellington paused, making sure he had Marcus's complete attention, as well as the attention of everyone within earshot. "This can't just be words. If you're truly sorry, if you truly understand what you did wrong, then you need to do something about it. You need to make this right." Marcus nodded eagerly. "Yes, absolutely anything. What can I do?" Wellington looked around at the crowd of tourists, the cameras still recording, and the security personnel waiting to see how this unprecedented situation would resolve itself. He took a deep breath and made a proposal that nobody saw coming. "I want you to help me educate people about what we do here. I want you to use that video you were making, and all the attention this incident is getting, to teach others about respect and tradition and the importance of understanding before acting." The suggestion was so unexpected that even Sergeant Hayes looked surprised. Wellington was proposing to turn a security incident into an educational opportunity, using the very medium that had caused the problem in the first place. "You want me to make a video?" Marcus asked, confusion evident in his voice. "I want you to make the right video," Wellington clarified. "Not a video making fun of us or trying to get cheap laughs, but a video that explains what happened here today, why it was wrong, and what you learned from it. I want you to help prevent other people from making the same mistake you made." Marcus looked around at the dozens of phones recording the conversation. He realized that Wellington was offering him exactly what he had wanted, viral content that would be shared around the world. But instead of content based on disrespect and stupidity, this would be content based on learning, growth, and redemption. "You would do that for me?" Marcus asked, hardly believing what he was hearing. "After what I did, you would help me create something positive?" "I would do it for everyone who might learn from your experience," Wellington replied. "Including you." Sergeant Hayes stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. This was completely outside standard protocols, but she couldn't deny that Wellington's approach was having a powerful effect, not just on Marcus, but on everyone present. The crowd was listening intently, clearly moved by the unexpected turn the situation had taken. "Wellington," she said carefully, "this is highly irregular. Are you certain this is the approach you want to take?" Wellington looked at his superior with steady confidence. "Sergeant, I believe this is an opportunity to serve our mission in a way that goes beyond just maintaining security. We have a chance to educate people about respect, tradition, and personal responsibility. I think that serves the Crown and the country better than simply processing another arrest." The police officers looked to Sergeant Hayes for guidance. This was uncharted territory for everyone involved. A security breach that should have resulted in immediate arrest was turning into something completely different. A teachable moment that was already captivating people around the world. Marcus stood there, overwhelmed by the unexpected turn his day had taken. He had come to London seeking viral fame through disrespectful behavior. Instead, he was being offered the chance to achieve something much more meaningful, the opportunity to turn his mistake into a lesson that could help others. But Wellington wasn't finished with his surprising proposal. What he said next would cement this incident as one of the most memorable moments in Buckingham Palace history. Private Wellington looked directly at Marcus, then at the crowd of tourists who had gathered to witness this unprecedented scene. His next words would be heard by thousands of people in person, and eventually by millions more through social media and news coverage around the world. "Marcus," Wellington said, his voice clear and confident, "I want to make you an offer that I've never made to anyone before, and probably never will again." The crowd leaned in closer, sensing that something truly extraordinary was about to happen. Even the police officers and security personnel stopped their routine procedures to listen. Sergeant Hayes watched with a mixture of admiration and concern, wondering what her young guard was about to propose. "I want to invite you to spend the rest of the day with me, learning about what we really do here, not as punishment but as education. I want you to understand who we are, why we do this job, and what it means to the people of Britain and the Commonwealth." The gasp from the crowd was audible. In the entire history of the Queen's Guard, no tourist who had breached security had ever been offered such an opportunity. The idea of turning a security incident into an educational experience was completely unprecedented. Marcus stared at Wellington in complete disbelief. "You want me to spend the day with you? After what I just did?" "Exactly because of what you just did," Wellington replied. "You made a mistake based on ignorance and a desire for attention. But I can see that you're capable of learning and growing from this experience. I think you could become an advocate for the respect and understanding that we need from tourists." Sergeant Hayes stepped forward, her expression serious. "Wellington, I need to speak with you privately again. This is far beyond anything in our protocols." Wellington nodded respectfully. "Of course, Sergeant. But I believe this could serve our mission better than traditional punishment." While Wellington and Sergeant Hayes spoke quietly, Marcus found himself surrounded by the same tourists who had watched his foolish behavior just minutes earlier. But now their expressions had changed from disapproval to curiosity, and even admiration for the guard's unexpected response. An elderly British gentleman, who had earlier criticized Marcus's behavior, approached him with a thoughtful expression. "Young man," he said quietly, "that soldier just offered you something remarkable. I've been visiting this palace for 40 years and I've never seen anything like this." A mother with 2 young children nodded in agreement. "He's giving you a chance to turn something terrible into something beautiful. That's a rare gift." Marcus felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about him anymore. Wellington's offer had transformed his personal mistake into a public moment of grace and education that was affecting everyone present. The conversation between Wellington and Sergeant Hayes continued for several minutes. Other guards had been called to the scene, and a small group of officials from the palace administration had arrived to assess the situation. This was quickly becoming one of the most complex and unusual incidents in recent palace history. Finally, Sergeant Hayes returned to Marcus with Wellington at her side. Her expression was serious but not hostile. "Mr. Thompson," she said formally, "Private Wellington has made a request that is highly unusual and completely outside our normal procedures. However, after discussing the matter with palace officials, we've decided to allow his proposal, with several important conditions." Marcus felt his heart racing with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "What kind of conditions?" "First, you will remain under escort at all times. Second, any video or social media content you create must be approved by palace communications staff before being published. Third, you will sign a comprehensive agreement taking full responsibility for your actions and committing to use this experience constructively." Wellington added, "And fourth, you'll spend time not just with me, but with other members of the Guard, learning about our training, our history, and our dedication to service. This isn't going to be a casual tourist experience, this is going to be serious education." The crowd watched in amazement as Marcus considered the offer. Here was the viral content he had dreamed of, but it would be content based on learning, respect, and personal growth rather than disrespectful behavior and cheap laughs. I accept, Marcus said without hesitation. I accept all the conditions. I want to learn. I want to understand. And I want to help other people understand too. Wellington smiled for the first time since the incident began. Excellent. Then let's begin your education. What followed was unlike anything anyone present had ever witnessed. Wellington began explaining the history and significance of the Queen's Guard, while Marcus listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and clearly absorbing every word. The crowd that had gathered to watch a security incident found themselves receiving an impromptu masterclass in British military tradition. Wellington explained how guards are selected from elite infantry regiments, how they undergo rigorous training in both ceremonial duties and combat skills, and how their role combines public service with serious military responsibility. He described the weight of their uniforms, the significance of their weapons, and the pride they take in maintaining centuries-old traditions. Marcus recorded everything with Wellington's permission, but his approach was completely different from his earlier behavior. Instead of trying to create spectacle, he was documenting a genuine learning experience. His questions were respectful and thoughtful, and his obvious transformation was compelling to watch. I had no idea, Marcus said repeatedly as Wellington shared details about guard training and responsibilities. I thought you guys were just standing there for show. I didn't realize you were real soldiers with real training and real missions. That's exactly the problem, Wellington replied. Too many people see us as tourist attractions rather than the professional military personnel we are. That's why education is so important. As the afternoon progressed, other guards joined the conversation during their breaks. Each shared different perspectives on their service, their pride in their units, and their commitment to their duties. Marcus listened to stories of deployment overseas, of the honor they felt in serving the Crown, and of the responsibility they felt to maintain standards that had been set by generations of soldiers before them. The tourists who had initially gathered to watch a security incident found themselves witnessing something much more valuable, a genuine moment of human connection, and learning that was transforming both the guard and the tourist involved. Social media posts about the incident were spreading rapidly around the world, but the narrative was evolving from American tourist attacks British Guard to British Guard shows incredible kindness to apologetic tourist. The story was becoming one of forgiveness, education, and the power of understanding to bridge cultural differences. But Wellington wasn't finished with his surprises. As the afternoon drew toward evening, he made one final offer that would complete Marcus's transformation and create a lasting impact that neither of them could have imagined. As the sun began to set over London, casting golden light across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace, Private Wellington made his final and most surprising offer to Marcus. The day had been filled with education, understanding, and genuine connection between two young men who had started as adversaries and become something approaching friends. Marcus, Wellington said, his voice carrying the weight of sincerity, I have one last proposal for you. Tomorrow morning I'm off duty, and I'd like to invite you to visit the Regimental Museum and meet some of our veterans. I think hearing their stories would complete your education about what we represent. Marcus was speechless. The kindness and trust that Wellington had shown him throughout the day had already exceeded anything he could have imagined. Now the guard was offering to spend his personal time continuing Marcus's education. James, Marcus said, using Wellington's first name for the first time, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done today. You could have had me arrested. You could have made this the worst day of my life. Instead, you've made it the most meaningful day of my life. The crowd that had gathered earlier in the day had largely dispersed, but a core group of tourists and palace staff remained to witness the conclusion of this extraordinary incident. Many had been documenting the entire experience, and the story was already spreading across social media platforms worldwide. Wellington's supervisor, Sergeant Hayes, approached the two young men with a thoughtful expression. Throughout the day, she had watched this unprecedented situation unfold with growing admiration for her subordinates, judgment, and growing respect for Marcus's willingness to learn and change. Gentlemen, she said formally, I need to inform you that this incident has attracted attention at the highest levels of palace administration. The communications department has been monitoring social media response to this story, and they're very interested in the positive message that's emerging. Marcus looked nervous. Am I in trouble? I know this was all highly irregular. On the contrary, Sergeant Hayes smiled. The palace is considering whether this might become a model for future educational outreach. The way you two have handled this situation has generated more positive publicity for the Queen's Guard than we've had in years. Wellington looked surprised. Are you saying that the palace approves of what we've done today? I'm saying that sometimes the best way to serve tradition is to find new ways to honor it. What you did today honored our traditions by helping someone understand and respect them. That serves our mission perfectly. Marcus pulled out his phone and looked at the video he had been recording throughout the day. What had started as an attempt to create disrespectful viral content had become something completely different. A genuine documentary about learning, growth, and the power of kindness to transform difficult situations. James, Marcus said, I want to make sure this story gets told the right way. Not as some feel-good fluff piece, but as a real story about respect, tradition, and the importance of understanding before judging. Wellington nodded approvingly. That's exactly what I hoped you would say. Over the following weeks, Marcus's story would indeed go viral, but in ways he never could have predicted. The video content he created, working closely with palace communications staff, became a powerful educational tool that helped millions of people around the world understand the real significance of the Queen's Guard. Marcus extended his stay in London by 2 weeks. Spending time with guards, veterans, and military historians, he learned about the regiment's combat history, their role in major conflicts, and the personal sacrifices made by generations of soldiers. His social media posts during this period showed genuine enthusiasm for learning and deep respect for the people he was meeting. The story attracted international media attention, but the focus was on the positive aspects: Wellington's extraordinary kindness, Marcus's genuine transformation, and the power of education to bridge cultural differences. News outlets around the world picked up the story as an example of how difficult situations could be resolved through understanding rather than punishment. Marcus returned to Detroit, a changed person. His social media following had indeed grown dramatically, but for reasons completely different from what he had originally intended. People followed him not for outrageous stunts or disrespectful behavior, but for his genuine enthusiasm for learning about different cultures and traditions. He began speaking at schools and community centers about his experience, sharing the lessons he had learned about respect, understanding, and the importance of thinking before acting. His talks were popular not because they were entertaining, but because they were authentic and meaningful. Private Wellington continued his duties with the Queen's Guard, but he too was changed by the experience. His approach to dealing with tourists became more educational and patient, and he found himself serving as an informal ambassador for his regiment. His superiors recognized his natural teaching abilities and eventually assigned him to work with the palace's public education programs. The friendship between Marcus and Wellington continued long after that day at Buckingham Palace. They stayed in touch through social media and video calls, with Marcus eventually visiting London again, this time as an invited guest rather than a troublemaking tourist. A year later, Marcus established a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting cultural understanding and respect through education. The organization, called Bridges of Understanding, worked to prevent the kind of cultural misunderstandings that had led to his original mistake. Wellington was eventually promoted and assigned to train new guards, partly because of his demonstrated ability to turn difficult situations into positive outcomes. He often shared the story of Marcus Thompson as an example of how patience and understanding could achieve better results than traditional punishment. The incident at Buckingham Palace became a case study in crisis management and conflict resolution, taught in business schools and military academies around the world. It demonstrated how a single moment of poor judgment could be transformed into an opportunity for education and growth when handled with wisdom and compassion. Marcus and Wellington's story proved that even the most embarrassing mistakes could become the foundation for positive change. It showed that understanding and forgiveness could be more powerful than punishment, and that genuine learning could happen when people approached each other with open minds and generous hearts. The video that Marcus had originally intended to make for cheap laughs and viral fame was never posted. Instead, the story that emerged from that day became something much more valuable, a lasting testament to the power of second chances and the importance of treating others with dignity and respect, even when they don't initially deserve it. Years later, both men would look back on that hot Tuesday afternoon at Buckingham Palace as the day that changed their lives, proving that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to the most meaningful transformations.